Hello, Bill, and welcome to Story of a Storyteller. It's nice to have you on.
Thank you, Connor. Very nice to meet you. And I really appreciate you having me.
Not at all. When I first came across your book and your kind of story, I kind of said to myself, I have to get this guy on.
Good.
So first of all, how are you just doing in general right now? I know it's early morning for you and it's late afternoon for me. So
Well, it's 10 a.m. or so, which isn't too early. It seems like the older I've gotten, the earlier I wake up. So everything's good.
that's good. That's good. Well, why, seeing as it's early, well, it's not early for you. Why don't we start with early Bill and you as a kid? Could you tell me a little bit about growing up? Did you have any siblings? What were your parents like? That kind of a thing.
Yeah, I do have a sister who's 2 years younger than me. So there was two kids in our family.
Mhm.
Um, my father went to World War II. He was over in Europe and came home from there, went to work at what we call the telephone company here in the United States, but AT&T, Southwestern Bell, and had a career there. So when I grew up, it was in the 50s, 60s, and I often say it was very Leave It to Beaver, which was an old TV show in the United States that was just, very traditional working father, stay-at-home mother, very middle class, and I didn't want for a thing.
Well, I mean,
You know, and
you couldn't ask for better, I suppose, could you?
not really. Yeah, it wasn't a lap of luxury, but we absolutely had it. We did fine, and it just lots of a very stable environment.
Excellent. And did you grow up close to where you are now in Missouri, or did you grow up somewhere else?
I did grow up in Missouri, in St. Louis, and amazingly enough, the house I'm living in today is less than a block away from the house I lived in when I was 12 years old that my parents
Wow.
lived in for a long time. Um, but I've been around a little bit. I went to college in Kansas. I had a couple of jobs that sent me, one to Little Rock, Arkansas, one to Southern Illinois, and I seem to keep coming back to St. Louis.
And how much of a change do you think there is in the St. Louis that you're living in now versus the one you grew up in?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think St. Louis has always had a lot of great people and good neighborhoods. We're, really a grouping of a lot of suburban communities, and I live in a suburb.
Mm.
And many of the communities are the same. Some of them have changed. Economically, St. Louis doesn't have as many Fortune 500 headquarters as it once did. We are probably not the most vibrant economy compared to other parts of the country.
Mm.
But the population has remained stable in the metropolitan area, grown a little bit, and there's jobs for people that want them right now. So I don't know. The overall vibe to me is very, very similar to when I grew up. Other than the various changes in the world that have happened
Well,
everywhere.
yeah, of course. And there's been a few. I mean, even in the last 18 months, there has been a lot of changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what about then? Why when you were young in St. Louis, like was reading and writing, were those things that you were very interested in as a kid, or was that something that just I have to do it because school makes me?
I think I was, I'd say a little conflicted or a little uncommitted. I was very fortunate. I was just always raised expecting that I would go to college. My parents had both gone to college. I never considered that I wouldn't. Academics were always encouraged. And, I think my parents asked me about homework and this and that. I will say I was not a very attentive student, but I think I've learned in later life somehow just by showing up, I really did end up with a good education. I always enjoyed the things I read, but I didn't have a passion for reading. I had probably other things that were, I was more interested in spending my, free time on recreational time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I always read and, always showed up in school. So I learned the rudiments of the English language and writing.
You just got the basics and that was good enough. You're like, right, I'm out of here. I'm going to go play.
That's right. That's right.
That's good. That's good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that either. Trust me. I'm a teacher in my day job, and a primary school teacher, which is the same as elementary school. And yeah, I've met a lot of kids like yourself. They just want to get the bare minimum and then just go have fun.
Yeah, I've laughed of, since I published this book, and uh, a lot of friends have been kind of shocked that, that I was able to write a book even, or at least they like to act that way, maybe to tease me. But, in writing it, I did recognize, and I guess I'd encourage the teachers to keep teaching whether they think kids are paying attention or not, because I think there's any of my English teachers throughout the years would probably be shocked that I could write a book that was, reasonably well constructed in terms of the English language, and maybe even better than that. I mean, I've been told that it's pretty easy to read, or at least maybe very easy to read and compelling, and so.
Well, that's really, really good.
Surprising.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing a teacher loves more than being pleasantly surprised. I can tell you that much. So
Yeah.
I'm sure if they knew, they'd be delighted. So your parents kind of always pushed you towards, study and like that you were going to go to college. So when you did go, you said you went to Kansas to college, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So what was your what were you going to college for? What was the thing you were studying, your major?
Well, I went up really without a major, or without a really focused interest in anything. Maybe because of my dad's career, being kind of a businessman. The first major I tried was business administration, and I'll have to admit I was not a very attentive student. It was during the late 60s, early 70s, and there was a lot of things going on in campuses in the United States, and anti-war, Vietnam type stuff.
Mhm.
And I just, I wasn't the best student. I'll say that. So I bounced around from major to major. Ultimately ended up with a degree in psychology, and found myself driving a forklift, which I thought was fun, but not exactly what I'd pictured with my college education. And so I did go back to business school, finally, a little more seriously, and got a master's degree in business administration. And
So you started at business administration, bounced around
yeah,
for a while, but you finished with the master's in business administration.
that's correct. Yeah.
So you should would if you do you think that would have happened if you went to college in a different era? Do you think you would have been uh happy to start and finish at the same thing and bouncing around all between?
Oh boy, I don't know. That would be a deep question to answer that.
That's true.
Maybe it did a different time. I just was probably, if I'd had it was nice to blame the fact that I actually went to college on um, those times, and that had I not gone to college, I would have ended up in Vietnam, and I didn't have any interest in doing that.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. I guess I don't give it too much thought anymore, but I wasn't an enthusiastic student, and I regret that a lot. Later in life have gotten to really love to learn things, love to learn different subjects and learn more about things. And I look back on it as kind of an opportunity lost, but
Well, I mean, you still landed on your feet. You're still a published author, and you're still like you've achieved a lot, you know. And I think, like, I don't, I can't speak towards America, but I do think in Ireland, at the very least, there is a very there's a lot of pressure on people that if you don't go to college, you're not going to get a good career or a good job or whatever. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think as long as you're happy with what you're doing and you're passionate and you work hard, you can still have something fulfilling.
Same thing over here. And I think there is an acceptance. There's at least a lot of people who put forward the idea these days that, there's a lot of trades and other approaches to careers that, may, if money is the objective, you may make more money. Many people may make more money doing some things other than what their college education delivers to them. And certainly there's a lot of choices. I have no regrets. I'm glad my life took the path that it did, and I had, the experiences that, at least from a employment standpoint that I had to bring me to where I was.
And of course, where you ended up was working with, eventually working with AT&T, which is the same company your father had been working for. Is that right?
Yeah, the division of it, it's Southwestern Bell, but yeah, AT&T is the company name that's out there these days. Yeah.
Okay. And did you ever work with your dad, or were you just in the same huge company and two different sides of it?
Definitely two different sides of it. I had several summer jobs that he certainly was able to get me hooked up to, learning the what we call the crafts, the installation and that end of that business, what the wires are and how to make it work. And I really enjoyed that. I did always enjoy working with my hands. After college, I went to work first at Chrysler Corporation and into a role as a factory rep. And I determined that I didn't enjoy that as much as I might have thought that I would have, because I did enjoy cars a lot. But when I left Chrysler, I ended up at Southwestern Bell. But I was in a marketing department, and they were really dealing with the deregulation of telecommunications here in the United States.
Mm.
And it really opened up marketing to big businesses as a kind of a career. They were hiring a lot of people, and I was able to get on board.
So you're in a very corporate world then at this stage, are you?
That's right.
And what is that like? Because and the reason I ask this is, I always laugh at myself, because myself and most of my very close friends are people that are other teachers, and we're in this very tiny little bubble where people skills is the most important thing. And then when I do end up talking to you or meeting people, especially through this podcast, that are not working with children, or working in big corporate things, they have all these different skills, and it's almost like talking to somebody with a completely different language at times. So what was the corporate world like at that point in the 80s, early 90s?
I'd say it's probably hard to just characterize the corporate world in a broad general sense. I know for myself, when I was with Chrysler and then ended up at Southwestern Bell, and ultimately, working at a big accounting firm in the consulting division, I guess I never had a job where I was just sitting at a desk and doing some corporate function. I was always in a customer contact, business generation, client service type role. So I was often out of the office as much or more than I was in an office. I guess interestingly, just to play off what you said, dealing with people, getting along with people, is hugely important. And, a lot of adults in dealing with them in a consulting and or marketing kind of role where you're hoping to get some agreement and maybe, get them to agree to do business with you or to whatever. I don't know, maybe different skills, but it is challenging in its own way compared to dealing with, what did you say, 6-year-olds or 10-year-olds or whatever.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's the age range. So I teach from 4 to 13.
4 to 13, yeah.
Yeah,
So dealing with people, adults or children, is always a challenge. I guess it's always undefined. Everybody, the people you're dealing with aren't scripted. If we could
true.
control them, then maybe life would be more boring. But
yeah, I think if every day was the exact same. I mean, that's
Yeah.
one thing I found during the lockdown. Trying my best to teach without having the people in front of you. It's yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Having the exact same every day was a trial, most definitely.
Right.
So what just before we go on to the kind of big event that really changed
Yeah.
your whole life, what was your typical working day like up until July 1991?
Well, I'd say from the time in I think around 86 that I got involved in management consulting at one of what we used to call the Big Eight accounting firms. I was at Coopers and Lybrand before I was approached and hired out of there by what was KPMG Pete Marwick. So I'd say kind of a typical week rather than a typical day, because we would often get on an airplane Sunday night or Monday morning, fly to a client site, work 3 or 4 or 5 days at the client site, it dependent, and maybe even work in a couple different cities. The client work would involve generally, interviewing clients. We would be doing requirements definition kind of work. I ended up with the telecom connection, ended up being a networking and telecommunications kind of an IT type role. So we were doing design work, which would always start with requirements definition and, do various kinds of vendor interface and research to try to figure out maybe how to design a particular technical solution to something. So it was, meeting with people, sometimes doing some research, flying home. Typically would, have a day or two maybe in the office, and that would be busy with billing, maybe internal project team meetings, group meetings. I was part of a practice that people with kind of similar skills, compatible skills, IT type stuff. So there'd be some internal overhead. So the week was
There's a lot of variety in it then.
Yeah, a lot of variety, exactly.
Yeah. Because that's one thing I would hate to. I don't think I could function in a job that was the exact same all day every day. And I know it's funny whenever you talk to somebody that hasn't worked with kids or anyone who hasn't been a teacher, they're like, but it is the same every day for you. You just go in, you teach, you leave. And I'm like, haha, no.
Right.
When there's 30 something children in front of you and you have to keep all their attention for 6 hours at a time, trust me, no day is the same as the one before it.
Right.
So I'd like to now talk to you about where you were and what you were doing and what happened to you on the 2nd of July, 1991.
Okay. Yeah, I was with my boss, and we had flown down to Atlanta for a couple of days to meet with a client at a big bank down there. We used to have a kind of a service offering. We would gather a lot of data from financial service institutions about their IT, a lot of metrics, a lot of costs, and number of locations, transmission, just a lot of numbers. We put them in a database and compare them to their peers, give them a report, tell them how they were doing, maybe indicated some gross high level they, you know, under invested, over invested, whatever. There was, you know, some conclusions to start some discussions with them. So we were going over that. In addition, we were kind of coaching him a little bit at his, you know, suggestion. His company was going to get taken over, it appeared, and we had worked with him at a previous job to help him navigate, you know, give him some suggestions and brainstorm with him how to navigate the takeover to his advantage. So we were going to fly home for 4th of July holiday here in St. Louis, and my boss and I and this client, he said he would walk us over to the subway in downtown Atlanta, and that would be the quickest way to the airport. So we were walking down the street, close to the subway. I think CNN Towers is actually there, but and I heard kind of back over my left shoulder, I heard pop, 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 pop. And being July the 2nd, I thought, boy, that sure sounds like firecrackers. And I turned my head.
Yeah.
And as I turned my head, I just felt, you know, wham. And my eyesight, I mean, it just exploded in my head, and I couldn't see anything. There was a lot of pain in particularly my eyes, and I fell down to the pavement on my hands and knees. And I guess I remember thinking after a few minutes that I didn't know what had happened to me. I didn't expect that I was going to see ever again. And you know, it occurred to me that I kind of consciously, thoughtfully rolled over onto my back. I somehow decided that would have been a better position for me to be in, no matter what had happened to me. So, and there I lay. Couple minutes, it seemed pretty promptly, actually. An EMT guy showed up, and you know, emergency medical tech, and came up to me and asked me how I was doing, and started calling me Chief, which I'll never forget. And you know, he checked me out, and checked out apparently the other two folks that were with me. So it turns out it was a gunshot. Obviously, I was shot in the head, and the two folks that were with me were both shot, and they were killed. So I, you know, I've always thought I'm certainly the lucky one, and I often run into people today, and I'll tell them that I'm the luckiest person they're going to run into today.
And it just shows how, like, I mean, first of all, it's a traumatizing and horrifying event, obviously, but the fact that you can say, oh, but I'm the lucky one, like the fact that you survived and your boss and that client didn't, do you think that helped you to be positive about what happened, or are you just someone that's really positive and determined anyway?
You know, probably subconsciously, yeah. I'm sure that it does. I can remember I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks, and I'd say the first 2 weeks of that, I was in various stages of heavily, you know, well, a couple days I was unconscious, and then after that, pretty highly medicated. But, you know, the last week or so in the hospital, I was really not so medicated. And I think that allowed me to come to grips with it kind of slowly and hazily. But At probably at a good speed. And I don't know at that point in time if I really thought I was, lucky as I clearly do today. But I did know that I was the same person. I knew I was all there. I knew I was, uh, my brain worked the way it always had. I thought the way I always had. I didn't feel sorry for myself in particular. I didn't really recognize my limitations. As I was laying in a hospital bed and everybody waiting on me, but and I was aware though that I was there and I did know what had happened to the other two folks, and yeah, I guess it gave me some strength to carry on where they couldn't. So.
And like this might sound a bit insensitive, and I don't mean it to be, but did you have any guilt over the fact that you had survived and the others didn't? Like you'd often hear the term survivor's guilt.
I did not. I really didn't. And I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that. Quite a few things I'm grateful for. Number one is that it wasn't a real traumatic event. I wasn't in fear. I didn't know what was happening. Nobody approached us on the street and,
Sudden.
waved a gun or, acted like they're going to beat us up or anything. So I don't really, doesn't seem to me as a traumatic event that I'm suffering from PTSD. And maybe just because the whole event was just so kind of I can't searching for the right word, but it just wasn't. They weren't part of the event.
Yeah.
For me,
I suppose because like it was so sudden, and also,
yeah.
I mean, you didn't know what was going on until all of a sudden you had a serious amount of pain and everything, and you were probably unaware of what had happened to the other two until the EMT had come.
Yeah, exactly, and and none of us really. The fellow that did it, we didn't know him. He didn't know us. It was, in fact, totally random. So none of us and none of any of our decisions had any impact on this, other than just the happenstance of all the decisions we all make every day to leave at this time or go to this place. Yeah.
So you said you were in hospital for 3 weeks after, but obviously the recovery process wasn't completely finished. I know myself, I had somebody who had to spend time in a rehabilitation hospital due to a very serious incident with them as well. So like did you spend time in a rehabilitation facility of any kind? And what was that like?
Yes, I did. So what I experienced, after 3 weeks in a hospital, they had, it was time to release me. And I think even the medical people would probably admit they were a little confused about what to do with me, because I had a wound that was still healing, and I really wasn't. I didn't have medical reasons to be in the hospital at that point in time.
Yeah.
And yet here I am, instantly a blind person with no adaptive skills. I didn't have a white cane or nothing. Insisting that I go home where I lived by myself. My parents offered and actually wanted me to move back into my old bedroom in their house, and for whatever reason, I was not going to do that. I wanted to go back to my home where I was comfortable, where I knew where everything was. So as an answer to your question, that's what I did. I first went home, and over the ensuing several weeks, and I write about this quite a bit, I was struck, on a daily, many times a day basis with all the things I could not do as a person who was blind without the adaptive equipment and in some cases training that I needed.
Could
You
you
know,
could you tell me a bit more about that? Because I mean, obviously,
yeah.
as a sighted person myself, the first thing that comes to my mind are like enjoying movies and reading and video games, like those kind of things that are very sight dependent. But what were the things that really struck you as, oh, I really didn't think this would be this activity or skill or thing I do every day would be as affected?
The one thing that struck me just immediately was that I couldn't make notes. It was accessing and storing information, basically.
Oh, okay.
I could not even write a phone number down to refer to it if I was supposed to call, whoever. Um, and that just was an immediate frustration because I was trying to call people to do some research to figure out who to talk to, learn this or that, or, whatever. Even phone numbers maybe that I'd stored, on a piece of paper back then, I couldn't access. So that was a big thing. That wasn't obvious to me. And I describe in the book just trying to walk up my block, without a cane, without any skills, and just banging into parked cars and, truck mirrors that were hanging out right about head height. And, but, that was probably obvious to me that was
Mm.
something I didn't have any skills with. Finding things in the kitchen, all the cardboard boxes seem the same, whether they're crackers or cereal or uncooked rice or whatever. The cans don't differentiate themselves either, so I couldn't tell the green beans from the pork and beans. Just a lot of details. Recreationally, I used to enjoy reading Sports Illustrated in particular, but newspapers and things like that. So that was a huge frustration.
Mm.
So
So you said you started doing research and looking for help, I assume.
yeah.
So how did you find it, and how did you find it?
So when I was still in the hospital, the social worker there got me hooked up with a group called St. Louis Society for the Blind, and a woman who was very knowledgeable and valuable in my life back then, came to visit me in the hospital. And based on what I told her, which was that, I intended to try to go back to work and do the same job that I had done previously, and that, I'd had at least some assurances from my higher levels in the company I worked for, KPMG, Pete Norwick, that they would give me a chance to do that. She got me hooked up with the state of Missouri, and it's called the Department of Rehab Services for the Blind. And they just have to do kind of different client groups, whether it's age-related blindness, or in my case, it was sort of more of an occupational therapy sort of a category. Yeah. So I was home about a week maybe, and she made a referral, and the fellow from the state of Missouri called me to talk about it, and came by and we talked about it. Part of the, so rather than going into rehab directly out of the hospital, there was a belief within the blindness community that what the state of Missouri wanted from me was a commitment of a year, that I would go, and it would take me a year to, become comfortable with being blind, first of all, emotionally, and then be in a position to assimilate whatever it is they wanted to teach me, I guess.
Mm.
And in some cases, maybe acquiring some of the skills might take that long. And I was, I couldn't devote a year to it. I mean, I
Years a
just
long
couldn't.
time.
I was a divorced father of two young kids at the time. I just couldn't imagine, jumping out of their life at that point in their lives. And the other thing had to do with this, my business world. If in fact I was going to get, be given the opportunity to come back to work, and I didn't know if it would work. They didn't know if it would work, but we could find out.
Mm.
What I did was dealing with clients, whether it's generating business or providing consulting services, and my existing clients wouldn't wait a year either. So I was in a big hurry.
Yeah. So what was what do you think? Because you explained about the about like things like storing and accessing information was something really tricky for you at that time. What was something that you adapted to successfully or quickly then in that case?
Well, my dad and I, given the world of technology in 1991, we kicked it around, and what we ended up doing was going out and buying me a handheld dictation device,
Oh, okay.
with a little micro cassette in it, and that worked great. Although obviously, here we are 30 years later, and people may not completely remember what cassettes are, but as
I
you
do.
piled more messages, yeah, I know people do. As you piled more messages on it, that got to be, an hour's worth of one phone number after another, or the directions to get to someplace, or whatever it might have been. So it wasn't very efficient, but it worked. It solved the problem immediately, for sure.
Yeah. I suppose that's the thing. It's all about the quick fixes so that you have time to adapt and then learn the long-term fixes then when you need to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we rearranged things in the kitchen and got rid of stuff that I knew I didn't need. I mean, we did a lot, just kind of common sense wise, faced with the challenges to organize my life as best we could, so that I, could live there and could get some sort of a meal, could find the things in the kitchen that I wanted to. So
how, like, obviously it's a very traumatic thing for you, but it must have been traumatic as well for your family, for your sister, your parents, your children. How did, obviously they didn't, they weren't ecstatic at the news, but how did they take it, and how did they all kind of deal with it? Do you know?
So my dad and my sister came to Atlanta immediately, so that by the time I regained consciousness a couple days later, they were right there with me, which was awesome. And they were upbeat, but they're both serious, sober-minded people, and we would kind of explore some of the challenges, or what life might be after this, and things like that. But I think, in general, they dealt with it very, very well. And my mom as well. She had stayed in St. Louis to kind of manage things from that perspective, not knowing how long I or my sister, my dad would be in Atlanta.
Yeah.
I think personally, I think my mom was emotionally shaken by this for the remainder of her life, frankly. And anyway, I know both my parents have died since then. And I do know that, they were both very proud of me. My dad in particular was, very proud of how I dealt with this, and that I was able to go back to work and continue on with my life.
Well, I think
So
that's a
there,
That's it. That's like, how can I put it? That's a testament to you and your determination, though, because
Yeah.
they probably both felt relieved that, that you didn't need someone to look after you, that you were as independent as possible, because especially what you did, 7 months after the incident, which boggles the mind. I didn't even know this was an activity that blind people were able to do. So how did you get, and I'm purposely not saying what it is so you can like wow my listeners with it, but how did you get to that point?
Uh, well, you're alluding to me taking up snow skiing as a blind person,
That's it. Yeah.
and I've yeah I when I was in the hospital in Atlanta, as I tell the story in the book, I remembered actually I had skied a very little bit, and I remembered it must have been a trip in about '84, seeing a blind skier in Aspen, Colorado. And at some point, everybody's wringing their hands about poor Bill. And I told my sister back, all the way back in the hospital that, I think somehow things are going to be okay. And maybe I'll just go skiing this winter. And I think they all looked at me like I was, nuts. But so that was kind of on the horizon pretty early on. And ultimately I did end up tracking down a group in Aspen who was organized to provide what's called guides for blind skiers. It's a thing. I didn't invent it, so.
Oh, you should just say you did.
Well,
and how does that work? Does the guide ski? Like I have seen it because I was looking at your website, and there's a very
yeah.
very interesting video there, and everyone should check it out after this episode. Well, could you explain how it actually works?
Yeah. So I am totally blind, and some blind skiers are not totally blind, and they would follow a guide more. A guide would wear very dark clothing and maybe yelp or make a noise every time they made a left or right turn, and the blind skier could follow. Being a total, I'm not comfortable in following sound that well, and so a guide skis behind me. And when we're skiing, he is essentially, or she is essentially saying, left, right, hold your next left, 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 right, left, right. And, it's somewhat more intricate than that, but not terribly so. I mean, that's the idea. And as we kind of get down to a lift area, they'll say, right turn to a stop. And we'll navigate through the lift line. Often the guide will kind of grab underneath my pole, and we'll be side by side, and he'll steer me just like a stick shift on a car, so to speak.
Oh yeah.
Just by grabbing my pole. So there's some techniques and
It's amazing.
yeah, and it really works quite well. So
and
I love it,
that's what I was going to say, because I can see in your face like you're lighting up talking about it and the directions. And that's the thing. I mean, when someone acquires a disability in the same way you did, a lot of people like, and I'm sure even there was a part of you even felt it. They're like, oh no, my life is over and things are going to be disaster or whatever. But that's not the case. I mean, the world today is so much more inclusive and accessible, and there's so many things like ski guides to help people with disabilities access the things that people without disabilities can do.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, my world today is, I couldn't have imagined kind of the world I live in, whether it's, technology, there's that I use, the talking computer. So, I use just regular Microsoft Windows applications, Microsoft Office, and there's a program on the computer that's called JAWS, which is basically an application interface that causes everything that's on the screen to be spoken to me through speakers on the computer or headphones or whatever, obviously.
Hmm.
So that's a big part of my life. That solved that information storage and retrieval problem that I had
Yeah.
in a much better way. Yeah, so there's a lot of that kind of support. There's also a lot of, I think I'm a better skier than I was when I could see. I've, had an opportunity to ski hundreds of days in the last 30 years,
Wow.
all over the Western United States, including up in Canada at Whistler. And I don't know, I just love it. It is such a kick.
Of course, yeah, it's a thrill whether you're sighted or not, or
Yeah,
sighted or blind. It's still, the thrill is still there.
yeah.
So then, of course, now this is like, I mean, it's not enough for you to go and to continue to work and to ski 7 months after losing your sight, but then you went and you wrote a book as well on top of all that many years later. So what, I mean, I'm asking the same question twice if you'd let me. One, I want to
Yes.
know, what was the biggest challenge of writing Snowblind just as a person? And then what was the biggest challenge of writing the book then as a person that was blind, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I had been, I have heard for 30 years that I needed to write a book. I ran into a lot of people in my, the 20 or so years that I went back to work, whether they were co-workers that somehow who had kind of lived through along with me what happened, and others were, clients and client people, and just anyway, people are always curious, and I'd say always very polite, but curious to know what happened. And so as I would tell the story, I would always be told I needed to write a book.
Mm.
The biggest question was just having the time. Once I went back to work, it was a fairly demanding job. One thing about being blind, I'd say I learned that surprised me was that I can do darn near anything, but many of the things that I needed to do take longer than they did when I was sighted, or for a sighted person. So I didn't really have the time, and therefore actually writing a book really didn't come onto the radar. But after I got retired, after I was retired, which was probably 10 years ago, I started fiddling around and, writing kind of the first chapter, so to speak, of the book, just what happened on, July 2nd. It was fairly easy, but I sent it to a friend of mine who was a writer, and or an editor really. And his reaction was, well, that's kind of a nice start, but it's not a book at all. And, so the thought was there. I ended up a few years later meeting a woman in St. Louis who has a business. She's an editor, publisher, and it's at thebookprofessor.com. Her name's Nancy Erickson, and she ended up encouraging me quite a bit. And from her professional world, she ended up being the editor and publisher of this book, but along the way, she encouraged me quite a bit, taught me quite a bit about, the structure of a book and the structure of a paragraph and some of the thought processes, things that I needed to know just to do it. But I still didn't throw myself into it. You hear writers, that have all this discipline that they're going to sit and write for an hour a day or hour and a half or 2 hours a day. I found for myself that, well, to answer your second question first, some of it was very difficult. I had really never told the story. I'd never thought through a lot of the stuff. I thought back through as I was writing this, and doing some research. I tried to, I mean, I've talked to EMT people, I've talked to a lot of different people. So some of it was hard. So whether through just, lack of discipline, or through the difficulty of revisiting some of the things emotionally, I put it down for a year at a time, several times. And then I'd get back to it, and I'd be surprised at maybe how much I had or where I'd stopped, and pick it up. I found that I would write when I was inspired. I would write. I could write, chapters, tens of pages, just blah blah blah. When I was in the mood or inspired, I could write a lot.
So same as us all then. All us writers were all like that.
Writer's block, I guess, is what that is, huh? Yeah. So.
And so then when you finally then had the book done, and I'm sure it went through many drafts, and there was a lot of editing process and everything, but when you finally became published earlier this year, like 2 months ago now, I think it is, what was that like? Like how did you feel on publication day? Like, it's a big achievement to write a book at all, but especially to write a book that's a memoir about a traumatic event, and especially as someone with a disability, that means is impeded a little bit to write it. Like, what was that moment like then?
It was really a feeling of accomplishment. I was very happy with the way that the book came out. I've been really thrilled with the reaction to it. With whether from a lot of friends who some of who I knew before, and some of who I've met in the last 15 or 20 years. But I guess I've just been really pleased with the reaction to it all. I mean, first of all, it's a feeling of accomplishment, and I'm glad it's over. I'm glad it's done. I'm glad it's done, whether it's just for my family to have a record of it, for my kids to find out more, and for other people that are in my life. But I'm also glad that I do think it tells a story of we all have challenges in our lives. I had challenges, I thought, before this happened to me. A lot of them may not measure up. This is very dramatic, to get shot, but I think the book describes kind of my approach to accepting what had happened to me, having the hope to go on, and the courage to not to buckle, not to give into it, and not to just fold up and go move in with my parents, or do whatever, but to continue to get out and try to live life to the fullest. It talks about going to rehab and following directions, learning what I needed to do, having the skills that I needed, and then coming out and being brave enough and courageous enough to jump out in front of potential clients or new clients, and this professional world that I dealt in, that I honestly don't remember ever running into somebody professionally who was blind. I since have met quite a number of people, many lawyers and professionals of other sorts who are blind. So I didn't do something that's completely unique, but I did something that I didn't really know. I didn't have a path for. I just figured I would get to the destination, and I just kept plugging away and doing what I needed to do between here and there. So, and I guess, just to finish that thought, I'm happy I've got it all written down for that reason, that if others can read it and gain from it, you know, the hope and the desire to try and the courage to get out and do it that I had, you know, I'd be thrilled. That would make me very happy.
I cannot imagine anyone who wouldn't come across your story and your book and not be inspired and not feel like, well, if this man can get over that hurdle, I can get over this hurdle, you know. And it's a testament to your determination and perseverance and,
well, thank you.
Grit. I don't know, maybe stubbornness, maybe some people will call it either.
Yeah, I don't think we don't want to go too deeply into my psychological makeup, I'm sure. But, yeah.
Well, it would need to be a longer podcast if I went into the psychological makeup of people who write.
Yeah. But no, just to finish that thought, I've had a number of friends of mine have bought multiple copies of the book and given them, and tell me they've given them to their, you know, grown kids. And you know, their point is to tell their kids to, you know, give up the pity party and get on with your life, you know. And that's flattering, very flattering to me that people could get that out of it and want to do that with their own kids. So
it's always nice to be used as an example to others. You know, so and you deserve that. I mean, what you've gone through and what you've overcome and what you've done since. Why wouldn't people? Yeah. I have one other question before so I always ask in every episode, I ask the last few questions the same for everybody, because I think it's really interesting to see the different answers. But before I get there, I do have one question. What's the one thing that you wish every sighted person knew, or something you wish every sighted person would do to better integrate or include the blind community?
You know, I think that's a great question, and especially considering my answer. I think anybody with a disability, and I would say certainly for myself, anybody that I come in contact with, it's always helpful and never offensive to ask me what they can do to help me. You know, if in any situation. I know you asked me something earlier about how my family reacted, and I'd say family and friends in general reacted by wanting to do everything in the world for me, and not wanting to do too much, not wanting to offend me, but and my family was, you know, very good about asking how they could help. And I write about the first day home and telling my parents to, okay, thanks for, you know, see you later. I'll call you and go home and
bye.
Yeah. And, you know, I didn't know what the heck I was doing, and they worried, but they trusted. So anyway, the answer is, I think I was always uncomfortable with people with disabilities. I probably didn't ask them how they were doing, you know, just generally how you're doing, not how are you doing regarding your disability, but just how are you? You know, I probably wasn't as friendly as I now look back and wish I had been, but the answer is for anybody in any situation. I think it's always appropriate to ask, you know, how can I help you?
Yeah. I do agree with you. Like, I mean, as an able-bodied person, there is always that fear that you're going to, I mean, it depends on how you ask, how can I help you? I mean, I had mentioned that I'm a teacher, and the recently I just finished a kind of an extra summer camp type thing for children with different types of special needs. And we went on the train one day, and we went over like the rules of the train, and, you know, you be an appropriate volume, and if somebody is standing and there's no other seats, you should offer them your seat. One of the children asked, he said, so wait, if there's loads of other seats and I see an old person, should I go up to the old person and say, do you want my seat? You know, it's kind of like, no. So I think that's the thing. It's like, don't be afraid to ask for help, but obviously think about when and why you're asking to help. Don't ask to help because you want to feel better yourself that you try.
Right.
Ask to help because you think the person might need help.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
and you might. I've also learned that I mean, I would say in general, most people with disabilities that I've come in contact with, I mean, most people have a sense of humor about the situation they're in, and you're probably not going to offend a person if if you ask in a sincere way, how can I be of help, and kind of clears the air. You don't have to worry about, are you doing what you ought to be doing, and just on the other hand, people don't become perfect human beings
no,
just because they have a disability either, and you're liable to hit somebody on a bad day. Somebody has caught me on a bad day somewhere along the line where I didn't react well to something, I'm sure. But anyway,
we're all human, so that's
yep, we are. We are, and that's I guess what I would encourage people to keep in mind is, yeah, fundamentally we're all humans.
exactly. So my last couple of questions then, Bill.
Yeah.
They're very nice and easy. So when this interview is over, I mean, it's a little bit after 11 in the morning for you now. So what's the first thing on your to-do list today? What's the first thing you're going to do when we said our goodbyes?
I'll probably, I've got a nice adaptive piece of equipment that I've got a whole bunch of books on it. It's called a Victor Reader Stream, and I'll probably finish reading a book.
Oh, well, excellent. Because my next one of my questions is, what's the last book you read? So there you go.
You know what? The last book I read was, there's an author over from your part of the world named Val McDermid.
All right.
A series, Tony Hill is the series, and I read one of those books. So I enjoy her as an author, and it's a good series. So
Excellent stuff. So there'll be links and everything like that for anybody who is listening or watching in the description, in the show notes, to find Bill's book and everything like that. If you're interested in buying it and checking out the full story, because I mean, we condensed the whole thing into like 45, 50 minutes. There's a whole book about it, folks. So Bill, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It's been great to meet you and to get to know you. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Connor. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. And I would also encourage anybody that has listened to all this to get the book. And
yeah, of course.
Hopefully people can be inspired.
Thanks again.